we understand construction. I think how we can help is identifying that risk up front and enabling the transparency that our tools bring to the table.
We were joined by Christine McLean to discuss EQ, IQ, and MQ, unlocking the power of softer skills. Christine is the newly elected president of the ACostE, the professional home for project controls. She has more than 20 years' experience working in utilities, oil and gas, and nuclear sectors. She gained her fellowship in 2018 and is a certified cost engineer.
That's your new voice, Val. 2 years ago, she transitioned from working in project controls to teaching project controls and wrote the first academic certificate in project controls in the US of A, which can now be taken as part of university studies. She's also a root panel member for IFATE, I think that's pronounced IFATE, RQF Assessor, Endpoint Assessment Assessor, and governor of her daughter's school. Now, those of you that can see us and are watching on YouTube, Val's had too much caffeine in his coffee this morning and is putting on all different accents and pretending to be on an elevator. But it's lots of fun on the podcast. We had lots of fun with Christine as well. New territory,
Absolutely.
MQ. I think certainly for all of us, we had many questions. Val, do you want to pick out the first few from your perspective?
Oh, I think it was great to talk about workplace motivations and what really is valuable in having, that inclusive, but also recognizing that soft skills are really required in projects more often. And it was very hard for us to really pin down where that was available. So trying to find something tactical that people could use. We got into some very interesting talks about neurodivergence, which I thought was interesting. But it was great. I don't want to ruin it for everyone, but I do think she would definitely have to come back for her part 2.
Absolutely. Martin, what did you enjoy about it?
Yeah, really interesting debate. We got some definitions for the acronyms you rattled off at the start there. We had some interesting debates, particularly around resilience and how schools do they teach too much to the test, teaching to the exam versus teaching for life. So some really interesting insights on that. And how about you, Dale? What were your takeaways?
No, I think you're right. It's around the education, knowledge versus application piece. And I think a lot of that you only really get through experience as well. So, but coming back to the whole MQ thing, I think it's really interesting because it is new. I don't think this pod particularly will give us all of the answers, but it'll give us a lot of good questions to ask, particularly of ourselves and the way in which we work. But yeah, as Val said, we need to get Christine back once we have results from her MQ training and testing to see what they actually mean and the impact they have on projects and for professionals. So with that, folks, we'll leave it there. As we always say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's exciting to be here as usual, and we've gone full naked, no virtual backgrounds today. We are deciding to just let you into our little worlds. Dale, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Val. I think we're holding true to the raw, informal, but hopefully informative with, as always, the guest we have on the show. Yeah, really good to be back. Yeah, exciting stuff.
Awesome, mate. And we've got glow-in-the-dark Martin here. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, and yourself?
Not too bad, mate. Not too bad. Obviously I missed out last week, so it's good to see you guys again. Using a new platform too, so I'll see how we go with this. As long as we can hear each other, I'm fine. But let's introduce our new guest, Christine McLean. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Very good. Now, listen, we've got a lot to cover in a small amount of time because I think I get the vibe that we could talk for hours and hours and hours. We're being a little bit silly before we press record, but rest assured you are in good hands, Christine. But why don't we talk about some formalities first, just to get that out the way. ACostE. What is ACostE? I know this is your one of your brands or one of your flags, perhaps. What do they do? What's their vision?
So ACostE is the professional body for people in project controls. Their vision is to be recognised and acknowledged as a global leading learned society and professional authority for project controls whilst growing our membership. So we've got about 1,700 people, 1,700 members, not people, members. We've got currently 9 directors that head that up, and we all have different roles and responsibilities. And what we're trying to do is, I hate to say this, bring it into the 21st century. We're looking at new website, new branding, new logos, new defined roles and responsibilities for directors, pushing the association forward. So we have a training arm, we do endpoint assessment for apprenticeships. And all I can say, there's certain things I can't say, there's certain things I can say, which is to be shared with the world. We have our conference in July where I'm bringing something new to it. Let's put it that way. Something called Unjudge Yourself. So we're going to have some people that are either neurodiverse, part of the LGBTQIAS+ community, people that practice religions, and it's having that open conversation with people. Because up until recently, and it's no secret that our blue books, our membership rules, said he. So I'm not being funny, I am definitely not a bloke. I shouldn't have even been a member, let alone their president. So that is the first thing we're changing. But I'm a big believer in behavioural skills and cultural skills, and it's that bit that makes the difference. I can teach anyone to plan. I can teach anyone how to use P6, but I can't teach people how to communicate, how to get on well with other people. Well, there's certain training you can do, but I have 2 autistic children. And I'm a massive believer in neurodiversity and the benefits that can bring. And I just want to promote differences. So I suppose I'm a little bit of a different president for the ACostE from what they've had historically. I have worked in engineering 20 plus years, but I am not an engineer. I am project controls through or through, rightly or wrongly, the thing that you fall into like 20 odd years ago. And I do loads of training and just upskilling the next generation. So that's where my focus is for ACostE, is how can we help people currently in project controls? How can we help people that want to join project controls? How can we attract a different membership than we currently have?
Yeah, that's awesome. The way you said that, you're such a straight shooter, and I love that. I mean, and if everyone's not convinced, I mean, just look at Martin. You know, anyone can learn this skill. You know, we've got some people on this panel today that you know, just blow your mind while they're here, but project controls, we all fall into it. Even that in itself is a story, I'm sure, Christine. I mean, where did you start? I know you kind of started in the oil and gas, but how did it get started for you?
I didn't. I started before that. I started in utilities. Yeah. So I worked in health and safety for the fire brigade. And there were 2 jobs when you used to look for jobs in the local newspaper rather than online. There wasn't really online. There was a health and safety job, and there was this other job called project controls. And I applied for both. Didn't even get an interview for the health and safety job. Got an interview and offered the job in project controls, and just fell into it. And that was what, incredible. 2001? Yeah, I'm showing my hand a little bit here.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's great.
5 years in utilities, then 10 in oil and gas, and then 5 in nuclear. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Now you've got me thinking. You know, what happens when you pit, you know, organized minorities and religions with neurodiverse people? There would be some fireworks, I'm sure. But I think it's great that you want to promote differences because, again, you know, that shows how unique we are as humans and the value that everyone brings. You know, we used to always talk about people bringing superpowers to the business. You know, everyone's got their own strengths and weaknesses, etc. And I guess that's kind of really predicated on this episode around soft skills and what you can bring from a non-technical perspective. Because as you said, I think I agree with most of that. Most technical skills can be taught. Some people are talented, more talented than others. That's fine. But when it gets to the softer skills, and I'm not sure if I like that word soft skills because it doesn't really give it value. What do you?
I don't call them softer skills.
Yeah, what do you call them?
I call them essential skills.
Essential skills. That's a good one. Yeah, I like that.
I've heard it called fusion skills is the other thing as well, but I'm not quite sure whether that lands so well with me.
But we have had a podcast, haven't we, Dale, Martin, where we did talk about the fusion of skills. I think that's almost like the evolution of roles more than necessarily just soft, but how roles in the future are effectively going to be more than one hat, which we're kind of seeing now anyway. And I think that along with how do you cope with back-to-back Teams meetings, increased pressure without a doubt, bigger projects, more complex, more people, and obviously a skills gap, which means that, obviously people are carrying more of a load. It can be very overwhelming, can't it, Christine, in the project world? What do you think?
Yeah. And when you talk about sort of the skills gap, I do endpoint assessment for apprenticeships in project controls, and they come through and they do their technical part really well. So they can put a cost report together, or they can do a network analysis diagram, or they can put a risk register together. But it's those questions, okay, so what is that telling you? And I think that's the bit that's missing. People, I mean, at school you're taught, aren't you? You need to revise for this exam, and you're taught how to pass an exam. You're never taught how to think. And that's the difference. I think we're growing a lot of robots, and I say that nicely because I do have 4 kids, so I can see their little mini robots, and they're taught how to pass exams, and not so well in some of my kids' cases, but that's a different story. At which point they're then set up to fail, and it's like, well, no, just because you're not that way inclined, you might be better off hands-on doing something, or you might be a great communicator, but that doesn't mean you can pass maths. It's I don't know, I just like to think everyone's got something to offer, and it's finding out what they like doing and what they're good at. If someone's good at communicating, put them in a communications role, or get them to be, certainly in project controls, get them to be the one and go and liaise with clients, or go and liaise with the horrible client customer that you may have, because they're good at it.
I had a fascinating conversation the other day about, obviously this AI kind of mainstream hit. I think we're kind of seeing the precipice of that, for good or bad, right? And how it's going to impact projects and work in general. And, people are scared of their roles being lost and all this jazz. But what was interesting was the conversation we had around what happens to people and the most valued skills. And one we decided on, just because we like to debate, I like to do this on the side as well, was that creativity would be one of the most essential skills in any role, not just in the arts and the creative. It would be a mainstream skill set in project controls, project management, because now you're not asked to be transactional. Now you're asked to solve problems, and to solve problems, you need to be in a space where you can think, and to think, you need to have that creative, idealistic kind of modality installed. And that's not really conducive to the way we work today, right? Because if you can imagine, someone asked me, he said, we need to be more innovative, Christine. Well, how can you be more innovative if you're going to be in Teams back-to-back calls for 8 to 10 hours a day? You can't force innovation that way. You need people to kind of come together with different thoughts and different practices and experiences and neurodivergencies. And then you'll have a diversity of thought, which will create innovation. I want to get into these definitions because I know we need a baseline, Christine. With every acronym we get thrown at, you can imagine how many acronyms we get.
I can throw loads more at you if you want.
Oh, I'm sure you can. Actually, ACostE, can you tell me what ACostE means?
Association for Cost Engineering.
All right, that's simple. All right, you pass. All right. It took me a while to get AACE organized because a lot of our members didn't even know what it stood for, and there was an internal debate. But EQ, IQ, and MQ. Now, I know the first two, and probably most of our listeners do as well. But what is MQ first, and then what are your definitions for the other two?
So, motivational quotient is what MQ stands for. So when I talk about my definitions, so IQ, and I don't like to think, well, in business today, everyone thinks, well, what sort of degrees have you got, or master's qualifications, or grades did you get? But it's more than that. So when you think about your IQ, you can have people that aren't very good at taking exams, but actually very intelligent. So I think of IQ, I mean, one of my kids sat some grammar kids test a long time ago, and they did non-verbal reasoning. Now, that's not something they get taught at school. That is either intelligence or it's not intelligence. And there's always that famous quote, and I'm going to get it wrong who it's by, but it's like, if you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, it'll always think it's stupid. So Einstein. I think, there's only one way that we measure people on intelligence, but I don't think it's right. But how else do you do it? Do you give everybody an IQ test when they come for a job? Well, it's not reasonable. You don't carry around a little card on your driving license that says your IQ is this. Again, is that a fair way to do it? No, probably not. So I think exam results and where you've got to, and it's possibly because I didn't follow a traditional route and I didn't go to university. I've since done Open University, but I didn't go school then university. I'm very much for the underdog, let's put it that way. That doesn't mean I don't think people with degrees and master's qualifications are stupid or shouldn't be considered. It's not that at all. But I'm very much people that have taken the non-traditional route and ended up where they have. Because that takes grit and determination, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
So when you talk about emotional intelligence, it's about understanding your emotions, and you have to be aware, your self-awareness has to come first before you can recognise it in other people. I think mine has probably come with age and being a parent and everything else that goes with it. You can't, I don't know whether I come across, I'm naturally an aggressive person, but I've learned to be assertive. And I think understanding your emotions, and I think blokes are getting better at it. I know my husband certainly has chats with his mates about their emotions or when they have times of mental ill health, and they chat now. And I think that's a good thing, because I think a lot of blokes think, well, I shouldn't be emotive at work and I can't cry and that's a weakness. Well, actually, it's a strength. It shows you really care. But it depends on the circumstances. You obviously don't want to go around crying all day because everyone might think that you have some issues. But in the right circumstances, is it a bad thing? But yeah, so you need to be self-aware and understand your own emotions and what triggers you. So if you felt something in the past, you'll tell yourself the same story within a matter of milliseconds. So if you're in a state of you maybe being made or potentially being made redundant, you've been made redundant before, automatically, this is how I felt last time, this is exactly what happened last time, this is what's going to happen again. And that's not necessarily true, but you can't tell your mind that. And it's like, yeah, milliseconds that it comes up with it. So yeah, you need to understand your root of your emotion. Where is this coming from? Is this how everyone else should feel in the situation? Am I slightly different? Everyone has stuff going on in their lives. So if you were to make somebody redundant when they're really happy in their marriage, their kids are doing great at school, everything's rosy, is that going to be the same as somebody that's possibly just got divorced or just separated from their partner, or their children have got an illness? And people take things in different lights depending upon what's going on outside, and everyone has something going on outside. So I think you just have to be quite mindful of knowing people, reading people's emotions and checking in with them, really. So that's sort of your emotional quotient. And then your motivational quotient, so that's about understanding and influencing people's motivations. Everyone's motivated by different things. And certainly when I've been in courses beforehand, I'm the odd one out. And I don't mind being the odd one out. I'm generally quite often the odd one out, and that's fine by me, but you have to be okay with that. So people are motivated by money, by status, but I'm motivated by developing, and that seems to be quite odd. I think it's becoming more common nowadays because there is so much to learn. And I think when I start off in my career, you have to be autonomous. I'm very, I don't know about the disc profile. I'm very red. Be brief, be bright, be gone. That is me. I know that to a T. I like working with people that are the other colours because they bring me a little bit back into line, which I absolutely love. But when you start off in your career, you strive to be the best. You strive to understand everything. You're supposed to make decisions. But then when you get up into management and leadership, it's all about collaboration and understanding other people and understanding other people's motivations. And it completely flips on its head. It's like everything you've done up until now, it's got you here, but now you need to change. And I think it's when you talk about acronyms, so you have your IQ, your EQ, your MQ, you have then your AQ, your adaptability quotient, you have your CQ, your cultural quotient. And then above everything else, it's like, but you need to be you. And it's like, okay, I've got all these things being thrown at me. I need to be an expert in all these things, understand all these things, but I still need to be me. And I think that's the difficult place to be sometimes, which makes you very Marmite to people.
Yeah, or Vegemite if you're in Australia. We got Vegemite down here, so, you know. I'm just translating for the listeners, Christine. I do not judge. I'm unjudging at the moment. So, look, I think the other thing is, like, I think with these challenges is, getting access to the right learning. So let's say you want to be a proactive person and you think you need some skills in the soft area to be improved, and maybe it's EQ, regulating your emotions so you can be a better listener or more active and empathetic or whatever it might be. How do you go about that? What's the best way, or is there not a best way depending on who you are and where you're from?
I think it does depend on how best you learn as well. Do you want to join a webinar? Do you want to be involved in a conversation, or just want to listen to a conversation? Do you want to do some active learning and go and read some books, or do you want to see a visual presentation? It's very much dependent upon how you best take information in. So Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? Are you a kinesthetic learner? How do you learn best and what works for you? So if you are a visual learner, you might want to join a presentation so you can see things on screen. If you are an auditory learner, you might listen to a podcast because that's how it goes in for you. And if you're kinesthetic, you might do a multitude of things, but then take it away, see how you feel about it, and then maybe go back to something, or maybe then go and Google something. I think it's really difficult. I mean, for the ACostE, I've done webinars, and I'm going to do some more. And they do cover a lot of the softer skills. So it does cover communication and adaptability, resilience. I'm going to do emotional intelligence, motivational quotient, because there is very little out there on those type of areas. You'll find multitudes on planning, on cost, on risk, and estimating, even project life cycles. But people skills, I've joined management conferences, or maybe SEN conferences. I know it's a bit strange if you're not necessarily interested in special educational needs, but they do a lot of behavioural stuff in those. I did my mental first aid training. I got to understand more about suicide and depression and people's thought processes. It's putting yourself in situations that aren't the norm, I think, is the only way to do it at the moment. Yeah.
Well, if there's any ideas after this, because we talked about being creative and all that, Dale and Martin and I would love to be involved in any type of webinar where we could share. I think there's something around soft skills for practicality and application. I mean, the hard bit is a lot of the examples, or at least the courses that I've seen for this type of these types of offerings, are generally so distant from where we actually need to apply them that they're irrelevant from a demonstration perspective. And you say, well, because I find I tend to sit in that neurodivergent space as well, Christine, as you probably can gather. And so for me, I'll take all three of those learnings any day of the week, right? So I'll read something, then I'll have to listen to it, then I'll have to do it, and then I'll probably go back to reading it, and then I'll listen to it. Even getting to this podcast this morning, I'm still asking Dale for the link, and it's been probably 3 years. So I think for us, there needs to be some area created almost for practical applications of soft learning for the use in project management or project delivery or project controls or whatever it might be. What's your views on that? I mean, you work in that learning space now, right? Yep. Have you seen anywhere that's forming, or have you got some ideas of how to best deliver that to the members?
So I think that's certainly one of the things that I want to bring in as the new president of the ACostE, is giving our members those type of learnings. And we're creating a new branding, new website, but more importantly, creating a community area where people can go and ask those questions, or ask the members, what do you want to see from the next webinar? And it might not be we do a technical one for a whole year, but that's because people want other things, but they need to tell us what they want. I can write a course on anything. I can have a discussion on anything, but someone needs to tell me they want it. I don't want to force it upon them. Well, I'd love to, but there are certainly people you'd want to pick out that you've worked with and go, right, you definitely need to go on cultural awareness training. You need to go on emotional intelligence training. But you can't just go around saying that to people. You hope that they realise they are lacking in these areas and want to improve, and just say, okay, I'd like a webinar on building resilience. What is it, and how do I actually go about doing this? And come from someone in the industry, or other people within ACostE that work in the industry, it's that practical application. We've all got different stories to tell. We've all worked for particularly difficult clients, and it's how did you overcome that? What worked? More importantly, what hasn't worked? Because that's the thing in project controls. I think you only learn by your really horrible projects and getting yourself out of a hole. Which is generally most projects. They're not delivered on time and to budget. Everyone shoots the messenger, which is project controls. But it's how you deal with that.
Yeah. We got plenty of bulletproof vests in the closet, so we can bring them out. I find it fascinating listening to you chatting there, Val, because there's so many places we could go with this. I mean, I was just thinking in terms of IQ, so sort of technical skill. It's quite easy to these days because I think we've been given the techniques to understand someone's technical capability. But apart from the training, I don't know if organizations or managers or leaders are equipped to identify EQ and MQ levels in people. And if we could, then there wouldn't actually be an issue to say, actually, you need to improve on your EQ or you need to improve on your MQ, just like we can say you need to improve on your planning capability or your understanding of earned value or your understanding of, a work breakdown structure, whatever the case might be. So it feels like we're very early doors on this topic, which is fantastic. But if we peel back some of the layers, Christine, it was quite interesting as you're chatting there around, how sort of it's getting better in men sharing their feelings and things like that around the whole EQ side. And Val and Martin will know Al Simonite. I caught up with Al just a bit earlier, and we're chatting about how he was saying that he had heard on about one or two men that had, in the recent few years, taken sort of leave because they had sort of mental health stress type challenges to work through. And whilst the organizations were very good at supporting them during those phases, when they returned, there was this sort of unspoken underlying tone of, well, maybe you're not tough enough, type thing. And we were saying that should actually be applauded to say, I'm struggling here and I need some time out for me. And we don't do that enough in our profession. We don't go, actually, well done for looking after yourself. That's actually really, really good, because if you can't look after yourself, you won't be able to look after anyone else, right? Yet we still hear stories where it's almost frowned upon, not out loud, but there's underlying tones, and which still flabbergasted me. And I wonder perhaps if we're in a bit of an echo chamber where we talk to people that get this and understand this, yet the masses still don't. I'm not sure.
I think there's a lot of that, Dale. I also think the problem comes with the managers and senior leaders that see it as a weakness. I mean, I've been speaking to people, and there was somebody that said, yeah, but if you go off with mental illness, are they actually going to promote you next? Because it shows that you can't quite cope with it. And I was like, it doesn't mean that at all. And it's having those conversations to say, it just means that somebody has a period of mental ill health. It can happen to anyone. And when I did my mental health first aid training, a period of depression is, I think they classified it as a period of 2 weeks of not feeling yourself. It's not very long at all. That doesn't mean you have to go onto medication. That doesn't mean you have to go to counselling every single day. It's just recognition that actually I'm not quite me at the moment. And if you have the managers or the leaders of the people that are experiencing this and they understand it and go, okay, what can we do? When you come back, you don't wrap them in cotton wool, because that quite often they don't want that either. They want things to return to normality. But it's just checking in with them. Are you okay? If they need a week off, they need a week off. They need a month off, they need a month off. No business stops because no business should stop because one person's ill. But recognising it in yourself, should be applauded, because that will probably make them a great manager or a great leader going forward, because you then understand it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And coincidentally, I was listening to the Stephen Bartlett podcast this week, and they were talking about how, as I guess us as society, how we've evolved, and there were a few interesting bits that probably lent itself to this conversation where if you look at social class and earnings, there's data that suggests that as you move up social class and you move up in terms of earnings, you actually lose touch and you don't have as much empathy and compassion for people because you don't experience the same levels because things are easier and they're not as tough. And the other point that they brought up, which I thought was hell of interesting, is that we know when babies are born, the first thing they do is they give it to the mother and their skin on skin touch. And there's studies that have shown that touch actually releases certain hormones and chemicals and allows us to improve the way we look at life and our empathy and all sorts of various aspects to us being human. But because of the way society's gone over the past 20 or 30 years, touching someone is actually not okay because it borders on sexual harassment. And so we've almost gone too far the other way. But if you touch someone in the right way, a pat on the back, a simple touch on the arm to say, well done. Those types of things go a long way, and we don't get enough of that. And as humans, we need that. And there's studies to suggest that loneliness is greater than it's ever been in history. I don't know, how they collect all of that data, but they've done the studies on it. But it brings us back to how we operate within projects as well, because we're so focused on data and analytics. And we had a conversation recently, Christine, where it's not either or, it's both. We need to focus on both using the technology as well as how do we improve as human beings, which I don't know. I think there's so much around data these days, but we're not equipping ourselves properly. And I'm interested that you're putting out webinars and you want to teach in this space, but I'm really curious as to how people will receive that and what their reaction to it would be, because it's very foreign. As Val says, we'd love to be a part of that experience because I don't think we have really.
And I think it is foreign, and I think initially, I'm going to test it out at our conference for this unjudging somebody, how well it goes down. And someone said, maybe if you record one of the sessions and maybe people can see it, they'll be less afraid of it, which does have some merit in it because people fear the unknown. So if you don't know what you're walking into, or maybe doing snippets for promoting the webinars, this is what it's going to cover, this is what to expect. So people aren't afraid of joining in or aren't afraid of putting their hand up and saying, actually, I want to know a little bit more about this. So it's very interesting when you said about loneliness. I mean, we all work from home. Well, I've worked from home personally for the last 6 years. So when COVID came to me, it was just business as usual. But the amount of people that haven't had contact with people, or even the younger generation, do everything via social media. When I say to them, if you liked a boy when I was younger, you had to phone up their house, and there was only one phone in the house. You generally got their parent on the phone, and you were utterly mortified, and you had to ask for the boy's name. And they're like, oh my God, they're utterly horrified by it. But there was no other way.
Yeah.
And kids now, I don't think, communicate with each other. But they do via text and Snap and Instagram and everything else. But they don't actually talk to each other.
So one of the teams that I'm working with, they're 3 guys that started working during the pandemic. So they have no experience working pre-pandemic. They don't know what a 9 to 5 in the office every day is like, both the pros and the cons. And it was fascinating having that discussion with them to say, most people I know that worked post-pandemic usually woke up somewhere between 5:30 and 6 a.m. to get themselves ready, do the commute, where they're like rolling out of bed at like 8:39, switching on their laptop, and they're working. But not only that, they were like, well, how did it work? Like, who covered your lunch? You covered your own lunch, right? It's not an excursion. Transport costs. Yeah, you covered your own transport costs. You were expected to go in. And then also being in the office, when you get them together, it's fascinating because when other people were on the phone You remember we had desk phones back in the day. None of this, Teams. And you knew when someone was on the phone, there's sort of etiquette. You wouldn't sort of raise your voice too much because you knew they're on the phone. Where because they weren't familiar with that, when someone's on a call, even though it was a Teams call, they'd be talking at high volumes and you'd have to kind of go, So there's the social awareness, right? This reality face-to-face social awareness that I don't think we have as well. But I wanted to ask you, because IQ and MQ, by the sounds of it, the way you explained it, and tell me if I got it wrong, it feels like there'll be a lot of overlap between the two. Because in order to motivate someone, you potentially have to have a high, sorry, not IQ, EQ and MQ. Yep, EQ and MQ. You potentially have to have quite a high level of EQ to be able to apply a high level of MQ. Now, I'm totally out of my depth with MQ here, so it'd be great if we could unpick that a little bit. But also, as you're going through that, I think it's quite important for listeners to understand the differences between empathy and compassion, because we talk a lot about empathy, but we don't talk a lot about compassion, because compassion feels too soft, and empathy feels like the buzzword to talk about. But I think compassion is actually where the difference comes in.
That's a very interesting insight for you, Dave. So I suppose empathy for me is being able to understand the other person's emotions. So if they say I'm upset, you can empathise and say, well, in that situation, yes, I can understand why you would be upset. But it's also very important when you empathise with somebody, you're not taking their emotions away from them, and it's not about you, it's about them. And I think that's really important. It's like, someone said, I know my husband's parents or his mum died. Everyone goes, I know how you feel because my mum's died. Well, no, actually, it's not the same. You can show empathy by saying, I'm really, really sorry about that. How do you feel? Or is there anything I can do for you? That shows empathy. But compassion's the hug, Dale, for me.
Yeah.
You know instantly when you need to cross that borderline between hands off and hands on. And that doesn't mean I go around hugging everybody inappropriately. It's not that way at all. But you know when someone needs that little bit more. It's like, do you need to send them, I don't know, what did I do for someone that wasn't feeling very well? I sent them like a book on quotes and stuff and just sent it through the post to them. That shows compassion without having to hug somebody. But it's like, actually, I understand what will probably make you feel a little bit better, and I'm going to do that. Whether it's a bar of chocolate that you place on their desk because you know you've had a really bad day. That's compassion. That's not empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's one of those as well where the more we talk about it and the more we practice it, the better we get at it as well. But talking about practicing, getting into the training side of things, I mean, what would it look and feel like to those that have never done something like this before? What would EQ and MQ training look like, or learning, or education?
So I've written a whole module on emotional intelligence. And it comes with like 4 different videos, probably about an hour and a half in length, and then a workbook to go with it. But it's about more about understanding yourself and how emotional intelligence works. The bit missing, and you mentioned it earlier, is how to put that into practice. That's the bit that is missing, that it needs to be added on. So motivational quotient would be, okay, so what are the motivational factors for people? People automatically think status, job, learning and development, but there's so many other things that motivate people. Maybe it is being able to take their kids to school in the morning. That is a high motivational factor for people changing jobs. So do you think about that? How can you put these into practice? So is it hybrid working? Is it giving people the opportunity to say, okay, between 8:30 and 9:30, of course you can take your child to school every day, because that's what you need to get the best out of you at work. So it's everyone's going to be different. Not everyone's got small children, not everyone wants children, but it might be an elderly parent who's going through an illness. Okay, I need every Wednesday off to be able to go and take them to hospital. And that needs to be okay, because it's a case of they're not dipping out of their job, they're not showing less commitment. What they're actually doing is doing something to make them better at work. because they're not worrying about all these things or all these commitments they can't carry out because they have to work 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, whatever it is. It's that flexibility you get the best out of people. But it might be salary. That might be what motivates people. But you need to understand them, or at least ask them, or at least understand what some of the motivational factors could be. Some you won't even think about.
And if I may dig a little bit deeper, how did you compile the training? What sort of resources did you use? Because as we're saying, there's not much out there. Is it something you pulled together on your own? Did you have a group of people contributing? How did that come together?
No, I pulled it together on my own. And I think it's from a combination of seminars that I'd been to, things that I was researched, things that I'd looked up, and my own thoughts, really. So it was a combination of, when Val said earlier, yeah, I'd do all of those things. That's exactly what I did. And you sit there and think, well, okay, has this been talked about more than once? Is this the unique thing? Is this just one person's point of view? And it's all that research that goes into it to say, is this credible what I'm about to tell people? Or is it just one person's opinion of it? And yeah, if you Google anything, you'll get all sorts of stuff that comes up. But when you talk about where do you find this information, it's not on project controls, or it's not on professional sites, like project professional sites. You'll find it on coaching sites, or you will find it on SEN sites. You won't find it in the traditional places you would go and look, because it's, as you said, it's not the norm.
I love the fact you brought up that word traditional. We posted a discussion debate recently on LinkedIn around traditional project management methodologies, and there's a lot of debate around what traditional means or doesn't mean. And yeah, we do post these discussions for people to have open discussions, but it's fascinating how the question gets attacked when you use a word like traditional. What does it actually mean? Which is great. But talking about being attacked, Christine, we've got Machine Gun Martin, who's prepped and ready there for you. So I'm going to hand over to him and bring him in.
Cheers. Got a couple of follow-ups to what you were discussing with Dale. It was really fascinating. Are there any free tests or resources for things like EQ and MQ, just for people to gauge roughly where they are on the scale? I was fortunate enough to have done one through work, and I found it was a bit different to what I was expecting. You could probably guess which way. But it was really it was really interesting, and one of the follow-ups to that was, do you think you can improve your EQ and MQ score? You know, if you're in the, let's say, lower quartile, can you sort of work towards getting it towards the average, towards the middle?
I think
or is it more a case around just trying to understand where you're at? Sorry.
No, I think you need to understand where you're at and be quite realistic. Is there standard tests out there for EQ and MQ? No, is the simple answer to that. That doesn't mean that I might not think about creating one, certainly for the ACostE membership. But yeah, I think you can train yourself to get better at anything. The difference being, though, whether that comes across as genuine, as in you've genuinely improved yourself, or you just know the right words to say, but you can't feel what goes with it. So if someone's asking you to improve your emotional intelligence, and you go, okay, well, I can recognise this emotion, and I know what it says, and I know what my response should be, so that's the response that you do give. However, you haven't read the situation very well at all. So yes, you can. Anyone can get better at it, but be genuine with that. And if you honestly don't know what somebody's emotion is, and you know them well enough, ask them. So I think there are six or eight core emotions, at which point everything feeds out from that. So are they feeling hurt? Is it a love emotion? Is it a sad emotion? Is it fear? And maybe having those conversations with people that you trust, and they can then be honest with you and you can be honest with them. So it's finding that buddy or that group of people that you're quite happy to have those conversations with. Generally, your partner's quite a good one, if they're willing to open up, because they don't tend to judge you as much as you think maybe other people might, or it's a close friend, or children. Children are generally really, really honest. they're a really good tool. And when I say, Val, neurodivergent children are amazing at it, because there's no grey areas there. They are black or white. And whilst it can be quite, but I love it. I absolutely see the benefits of it. I know exactly where I stand. I know exactly how they feel because they've told me. And you have to be okay with people being that blunt, because it's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of how they're feeling. It's like, okay, that's fine. I can deal with that. Or that's fine. Let's see how we can deal with that.
It might even be that. It might even be, I mean, particularly like they seem to just have very acute observational skills, and they're just being completely objective. Yeah. And that can be harsh too. And sometimes, I mean, sorry to jump in there, Martin, but I think the other question I was just going to ask is, what if you can't have IQ, EQ, or MQ to the degree that is required, for the role? I mean, one of the challenges we have, I think, is the complexity of having a diversity of groups and thinkers and people from various backgrounds, and then also requirements that we say you need to have potentially soft skills to be at the managerial level and beyond. Does that exclude people just by default?
I don't know whether it excludes. It depends on how bad it is you're talking about. You could have someone that understands all these things, but it's just really bad in practice.
Yes.
Or, and it's about, say, if you had a neurodivergent manager that was just really blunt and honest, well, then it's making those people aware of the fact you have a neurodivergent manager. This is how they not behave, but this is what to expect. So therefore, their expectations meet what they're getting.
Yeah,
and that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's different.
Like an Elon Musk kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, he's a complete nutter. But let's not talk about him. I would not want to work for him.
No.
But I mean, when you talk about neurodivergent people, Albert Einstein, Steven Spielberg, these people are neurodivergent. They absolutely excelled in their field. And again, whether you're neurodivergent or not, and whether you can gain these skills or not, I think everyone gets to a point in their career they should turn around and go, actually, I'm not doing very well in this job. I need to take a step back. But that takes a brave person to say, I am not doing the best for this team. So therefore, either I need to change, or I've tried to change and it's not working, or I need to hand this over to somebody else. Because not everyone is going to make the greatest manager. Not everyone is going to be a subject matter expert. Not everyone is going to be a great leader. But that's partly due to them and partly what they want as well. What motivates them? Surely if you want to be motivated by having an excellent day at work every single day, but you absolutely hate managing people, well, don't be a manager then. And unfortunately, I think that's the way that businesses look at it. They get their technical experts and you promote them to be managers, and then you promote them to be leaders. Well, that might not be the best use of their skills. You might find somebody else in their team who's a better manager, and they actually still want to stay doing the technical side. But again, and this is probably a bit controversial, businesses tend to have this layer that there is a cap at the technical level, and there shouldn't be. Because technical expertise is just as important as managers and leaders. So don't cap it. It's just different skills and people's different preferences.
Do we have any data on what we think motivates people in the workforce now? And do we think that's potentially changed in the last few years? If not, maybe your own experiences from your colleagues.
Definitely is. And it's more not around necessarily what's changed in the last couple of years. It's due to the generations. They have different motivations. So the latest generation, I can't never remember whether it's Z or whatever it is they are motivated. Well, they're rarely going to stay in a job for more than about 3 to 5 years. They are motivated by work-life balance. They are motivated with sustainability. People of my generation, I think slightly before my generation, are motivated by a stable job and being able to provide for their families. That seems to worry the younger generation less, because they're just like, it's fine. It'll sort itself out. I think they're much more free and easy and happy with things like that, rather than my generation where you get indoctrinated. No, you need to get a job, and then you get married, and then you have children, and you need to stay in that job, and you can't leave a job until you've got another job. And whereas the younger generation today are like, that's fine, I'll just go and temp for a little bit, or I'll go and be a YouTuber, or they'll find some other job or other way of making money that certainly people of my generation, certainly me, don't even think about. You think about things in a slightly different way.
Do you think there's potentially differences between sectors? So where I'm going with this is we had Will Woodhead on a few weeks ago, and he manages a company that has technology and some of the hard hats on construction sites. And his finding was it's money ultimately that motivates people. And I'd probably agree with you that between the generations, do you think that's just because of the industries they're in? Are there going to be quite big differences between that, or do you think it's a more general shift in?
So when I said I was different to people in the past, probably 90% of the room said money.
Yeah,
I was never motivated by money, which made me odd. Because I was just like, if I develop myself and I have all these different skills, I'm going to end up earning more money. So I'm not motivated by the money per se. I'm motivated by the development opportunities that I get, which will lead in time to greater salaries or changing career or changing industry or whatever it is. But that interests me more than just physical money, because we all get to a stage of where you earn enough. Hopefully you get to a stage where you earn enough, and you don't take a job then for money. It's got to be about, well, it is for me, and this is probably where I am different. I'm motivated by the role that I'm employed to do, not by the money I'm paid to do it. Because it's like, does this speak to me? Is this one of my passions? If it doesn't, I'm not necessarily overly interested. So a couple of years ago, when I got given this training job versus a very big infrastructure project in the UK as their project controls director, I ultimately took the training job, even though it paid less, because the other one was just another project. I would deliver a project, but on the flip side, I get to train people and to change thousands of people's lives. Which one speaks to me more? So I may be a little bit different because I'm motivated by different factors, but that's what I mean about you need to understand it.
Could I just throw this one out there to Dale and Val? Would you say your motivations have shifted in the last 10 years as you've got towards those director type roles? Maybe start with Dale.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yes and no, I'd say. I think I've been lucky because I've always had a growth mindset where I've always wanted to learn, where money wasn't the motivator. It's, am I adding to my skill set? Am I adding to my skill set? And am I adding to my skill set? And you reach a level where I think even in the skill set where you know enough about enough as well, similar to Christine's, you have enough money type level. And so I'm still learning, but I've got to a place where I now feel like giving back as well. So how can I help others learn? And so it's not a change from a shift of focus from money to giving. It's a shift from learning for myself to how can I help others learn. And so that has shifted for me. I think one of the other comments before I let Val come in about his motivations shifting or not, is just with regards to the current generation coming in, there is this notion of that the current generation coming to the workforce, the key thing they're looking for is to make a difference to the world, right? But yet when you peel back the layers a little bit and you ask them, well, how do you want to make a change? They don't know. And I find that fascinating because they may want to make a change to the world, but if they don't know how they want to make a change, how are you supposed to motivate them because you don't know if they don't know? But before you comment on that, Christine, let's bring in Val to answer Martin's question.
Yeah, mine hasn't changed. I think the only influence I had, because it's never been about money, It's been about doing things that are hard. I'm ex-defense, so one of the things that I've always enjoyed is just the grind. I've loved just doing things that others can't. And for whatever reason, it's like puzzles for me. Projects are like puzzles. And so I wanted to work on things that were so difficult, no one else wanted to do them. And that gave me an incredible skill set and a gift. And then money became apparent when I got a wife and kids, because, they need to be fed and watered and all that stuff. And so my focus slightly shifted on behalf of others. I think that's called compassion. And then the same has returned. So, like to Dale, I do like to give back. But I do connect with this contribution to the community. I feel like if there is no other significant contribution other than to ensure the company you work for meets its financial obligations and makes profit, I see that as a very empty, shallow goal for me personally. I'm not saying for everybody. But if it's contributing to the community, if it's helping the wider, and I think that's what you're talking about, Christine, if it's fanning flames to influence and improve the lives of many, and I can be part of that, that sounds interesting to me. That sounds motivating to me. And I would also say, I don't think you can motivate someone directly. You can influence them, but at the end of the day, they have to convince themselves. It's almost like slotting into their priority order system is to say, you need to get out of bed at 5 a.m. There's no way you can convince everybody to get out of bed at 5 a.m. until they've convinced themselves. And it's the want. The want has to be more than the desire to sleep in, right? And that willpower has to be driven by a higher purpose, and that's a really interesting space there. So I spent a lot of time thinking about my own behaviors and what they're driven from. But again, I think if you're in this space and you're probably thinking about it going, oh shit, now this is getting too deep and philosophical. But I think if you take a step back from this podcast or maybe re-listen to it, finding your equilibrium out there in the space and then seeing how you can give forward or give back will be far more fulfilling than increasing your bank account, in my view.
Well, also, when you're chatting there, Val, Christine, is that the difference between motivation and inspiration?
See, that's an interesting point. So when you talk about giving back, when I talk about my side hustles or the other things that I do, so the ACostE, being the president of the ACostE, I give my time for free. I don't get paid for that. I do NVQ and QCF assessing and endpoint assessing for apprenticeships. Okay, I get paid a nominal amount. I'm not talking about a lot of money, but that's about upskilling the next generation. I sit on a government REAP panel for approving apprenticeship standards, which I think it's about more than 350,000 people have signed up to the apprenticeships on my REAP panel and stuff. I like to think I've played some small part in changing 350,000 people's lives. And that's what gets me going. It's not, no disrespect, it's not my day job. It's my other thing. So I'm a parent governor for my daughter's specialist school and chair of their finance committee. Again, you don't get paid for it. But it's about making sure there's that robustness, that they're going to spend the money in the right places, that they're doing the right things at our school, that I'm helping apprenticeships or people be able to get apprenticeships that are credible. It's all of those things that get me up in the morning. So again, it's not stuff I get paid for.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think the burden of responsibility is either something that motivates you or it's something that can be overwhelming, or perhaps it could be same. And I do think that some people get lost along the way and they fall into project controls and then they find meaning and purpose and they live happily ever after. I think that's the case for most people. So check out project controls. It's a lovely spirited guidance system to get your life in order. I always thought about this about planners and certain other technical skills, Christine. Do you find that the skills that you've learned on projects impacted positively your personal life?
No.
You don't think controls, planning, soft skills?
I think I was always a planner anyway. I've always knew, and maybe that's from having 4 kids and stuff. And you're like, well, actually, we need to plan next year's holiday 11 months in advance to be able to get the right size villa and the right flights and everything else like that. But I think that's inherent within me before I was in project controls. I've always been a bit of a planner and had a diary and cost. Well, this is the weird thing. So when I grew up, I wanted to be a corporate tax solicitor because I like the law. And Martin
Wow.
looking for the face.
I did too.
And that's because it's numbers and it's law as well. So I think a lot of these skills I had, but not in the project controls world as such, but had an interest, well, just as me personally. Risk is something different, and I think that changes with age. I am now very aware of my own mortality, and I take far less risks than I used to. And I think that probably plays an impact when I do risk workshops for clients, because I know I'm getting more risk adverse the older I get. So that probably does play some part in my skills.
Yeah, I feel like for you, Christine, it's the other way, right? Where you brought your personality into the project controls profession and it's influenced project controls, not the other way. Which is great. It's great. We need big personalities in the profession. It's one of those where sometimes, controls can be quite dry to most. Whether you look at cost engineering or planning or risk management, and bring it to life. It's part of the reason I think myself and Val started this podcast, is to, I guess, show a bit of, the other side to just the data, just the spreadsheets, and just the numbers and the charts. But we do still have Martin to bring it back down to earth. So he's here for us mainly just to give him the banter, and he takes it and then swears at us offline. So he gets his own back. But look, it's been an amazing chat with you, Christine. There's so many places we can still go. So I think we probably do need to have a follow-up to see how the training goes, what the results are, and what changes or impacts it actually has. Because I think that's pretty key. For us being controls professionals, we're like, okay, we get the theory, we get the data, it's something new, we understand the training and the intent, but let's look at the data and the results thereof and try and make assessments. So it'd be great to have you back for that. But before we let you go, I'm going to hand to Martin for one or two final questions, and then perhaps for a bit of a feature question to throw at you as well.
Yeah, just one more thing that piqued my interest earlier. You mentioned around you're doing some training in the next few weeks, and you mentioned resilience. And I was wondering, how can you teach resilience in the workplace? And if so, how do you go about it? And just my thinking is, surely it's experiential in terms of training. You learn. I'd be really interested in how you would go about teaching it.
So I gave a presentation about resilience in business to the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. There are obviously slides you can teach people, but it's more about okay, now what does that mean? That's the most important part. So it's the conversations that go with the training is more important, I feel, than actually what you've got on your slides. I'm not saying that the slides aren't great, because they're amazing. But it is always the how, isn't it? Okay, so I know what I need to do, but what does that look like? And how do I actually put that into practice? And I think with a lot of training, that's the bit that's missing. You explain to them the how to do something, but not the why, the where, the what. What does this look like? How can I put it into practice? What does this actually mean as a result of this? Or am I just doing this because you're telling me I need to do this? But I think resilience is probably the most underrated skill people have. And the more setbacks you come across, I feel, the quicker you can bounce back for them. So people that have gone along very nicely in life, when they get hit with something they need to build resilience for, whether that's changing a job or working with someone they don't like, or anything a bit more sinister, so maybe somebody close to you is ill, how do you bounce back from that? So is it the conversations that you have with people? Is it the external help that you seek? COVID for people was a big thing. And I probably saw it very differently to everyone else, because as I mentioned earlier, I'd worked from home for 6 years. So for me, it was business as usual. And I took a while for me to get my head around that, because I was like, well, what's wrong with everyone else? Because it was just another day for me, and now everyone's working at home. And it's just like, but it's no different for me. But then I had to understand it from their perspective. Well, okay, they used to being able to see people every day. They're not used to working at home every day. People were feeling lonely. So it was then about, okay, so what do I do in my everyday life for the last 6 years that hasn't made me feel lonely? And how can I tell people about, well, maybe you need to think about doing this? Because, again, it worked for me. It may or may not work for them. But if they didn't know where to start, it's giving them somewhere to start from.
Would you tailor your message or your slide deck depending on the age maybe of people coming in? I'm kind of thinking, we've got quite a lot of people doing project controls apprenticeships now.
Yeah.
And they, just because of how old they are really and the stage they are in their life, they probably haven't really experienced or needed to experience things where they needed to be resilient. And in the workplace, they're going to work with people they don't like. They're going to work with difficult people. Whereas, I suppose the question is, are you having to tailor your presentation for people who are fresh into the workplace and people, say, with 5-10 years experience, maybe more? And what would be the subtle differences between the two if you were doing it?
So I think that's quite an interesting thought that you said you think the younger generation are less resilient or have less experience of being resilient. I actually think they have more experience of being resilient because they've had COVID, because they're constantly tested at school, because they're constantly on social media, and you can't get away from it. So everyone is always criticised about something different. So whether it's your haircut, whether it's you suddenly wear glasses, or you've got braces, or any other thing. And when I was a kid, if you got bullied, it was left at the school gate. It is not left at the school gate anymore. People just get constant text messages all overnight, multitude of people. I think they are far more resilient than we give them credit for. And I think the younger generation have had a lot more to deal with. Certainly in my generation, you were a kid. I don't think kids are kids for very long nowadays. And I think that's a real shame, but I think they have built up an inordinate amount of resilience that we don't give them credit for. When you talk about tailoring it, I'll probably run my presentation through my kids. I've got twins that are 17, so I'd probably run it past them. They'd probably tell me I was an old fart and didn't know what I was talking about. But probably get their perspective. Does this talk to you? Do you actually understand what I'm talking about? Maybe it's the language, but I'm certainly not going to talk how they text sometimes. Otherwise, no one would understand me. But yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think they're resilient in social resilience. I think the pressure on kids is particularly, but I probably sit with Martin on maybe the emotional intelligence piece. I think maybe they could definitely, from my experience more project specific, but their EQ doesn't necessarily, and I think that's a learned skill over time too. It's one of those things you can't necessarily learn. You've got to experience, but definitely social resilience. They are, if I had to deal with the shit that they have to deal with right now, I think I would lose my, it's just very demotivating perhaps to have the pressure of being judged even when you're offline or at home. It penetrates walls now. So it's a very strange environment, and I'm just observing from afar because as parents, you would know, Christine, there's not much you can really do. You can kind of safeguard them, but all you can really, is there any advice as well for resilience tactics? Can they get to a point where there's something you can practice? Is it affirmations on the wall? How do you get past the criticisms of others as you're developing?
I think it's, thinking to my kids specifically, and when you say about emotional intelligence comes with age, one of my 17-year-olds, I've never known emotional intelligence like it, even for anyone way beyond that age. So I think part of it's inbuilt, actually, and I think part of it's down to your personality. I'm not saying it all is. The other one is completely emotionally unintelligent, but that's a different story. They're on two ends of the spectrum. But that's fine. I think resilience is certainly for kids. Just talk to them, let them know you'll be there. There is nothing that your kid can tell you that you're not. You might be disappointed with them, you might be upset with them, but you're still their parent at the end of the day, and you'll help them through it. So as long as they know you might judge them, you might ground them, but you're ultimately there for them, and you've got their back. But I think it's the same for managers at work. If your people know that you are truly there for them as a manager, they will open up and talk to you. It's when they don't feel comfortable having those conversations that any breakdown or any disturbance in resilience happens, because you think you're on your own. And that's the biggest problem I think there is.
Yeah. Interesting conversation. Lines us up for a follow-up. If I may have one final comment before we end, I personally don't think the issue is with resilience. in the new generation coming in. I think the challenge is with entitlement. I think that's the biggest challenge, and bringing in motivational quotients with entitlement is probably a big clash. But let's keep it there, because I think when we have the results back, that is when we will see what they tell us. With that, though, Christine, heading towards the end of the pod, before we let you go, are there any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Oh, that's a big thing. I think it's when you talk about apprenticeships and you think about the next generation of people coming in. And I think the only plea I can give to those hiring managers is look for people that have completely different insights or different hobbies. Or, I mean, one of the best apprentices I ever hired, and part of the reason I hired him actually, he was only 16, so he was very young. But he liked stock car racing, and then he spoke Russian, and then he did army stuff. And I was just like, do you know what? You're a really interesting character. He obviously did well at the test and stuff, but above anything, it was, I think you are a people person, can chuck yourself into lots of different situations, rather than going for those students that are A's at everything, or have done the traditional things. One of my kids has done it, so I can't really say that, but like the Duke of Edinburgh Award in the UK. Something that's a little bit different. And I think that's the plea I would make to hiring managers. Just look for something that's different. Look for somebody that is going to make a difference to your team, whether it's diversity of thought or just stop getting clones.
Yeah. It's probably worth saying as well, you'll probably have hit and miss sometimes as well. But it shouldn't stop you from trying, right? It shouldn't stop you from trying. But look,
and
it's
if
been
anything,
amazing.
fail.
Yeah.
I say fail. If you fail and you make a wrong decision, it's your first attempt in learning. It doesn't mean it's the end. Effort never dies.
Exactly. And talking about failure, Val, any final thoughts?
Ouch, man. That was quick. You're quick. But I'm quick. It is good. No, I do think it's been a fascinating journey with you, Christine. And I know we are talking from all different places in the world, and we can still come on common ground and talk about interesting facts. And I think we definitely need a round 2 with you. Thank you so much for being part of this today. Really appreciate it.
That's all right. Thank you very much for having me.
It's been our pleasure and our privilege. There you have it, folks. That's the end of this episode. But remember, before you go, please do help us pay it forward by sharing a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Christine McLean, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.